Not long ago, I went to see my older cousin. He lived in a remote rural village. I was a teenager without a driver's license, so I took the bus. However, I accidentally ended up taking the wrong bus. This bus was going to another town. Inevitably, I got off in the middle of the road. It was a 40-minute walk from there to my brother's house. Also, the area was so remote that there were very few buses around there. I ended up just deciding to walk. There were only fields around and not a single person was seen passing by. Just then, I saw some scarecrows standing in the field, which was very unusual. They all looked like real people. I looked at one of the scarecrows. They must have set up some mannequins, I thought. Curious, I came a little closer, and they were even more shocking up close. The mannequin seemed much more real than I had thought. The skin looked real. It felt like a real person was standing here. I got goosebumps all over me. I looked at them vacantly, thinking, what are these for? The scarecrows all stood in the same position. They were standing in a strange position with their body tilted at an angle. It was such a strange and creepy sight. Just then, one of the scarecrow's eyes suddenly moved and stared at me. I was so surprised that I fell back. The scarecrow moved towards me as soon as I thought I had misdeemed it. I screamed and started running like crazy. Ah! Just then, a scarecrow, or a man dressed as a scarecrow, rushed towards me with a sickle in his hand. He ran after me, making some weird sound. I shouted as I fled desperately. What the hell is wrong with you? The scarecrow kept chasing me and making that weird sound. It sounded like a language I couldn't understand. As I glanced back, the scarecrow swung a sickle at me. My legs gave way with fear. Thinking that I'd be ripped apart and killed if I was caught by him, I ran away. Fortunately, I soon managed to get out of the field. When I looked back, I couldn't see the scarecrow anymore. I didn't understand why he was standing there for so long, pretending to be a scarecrow. One more thing I remember was that when I glanced at his face as I ran away from him, he was laughing. It seemed as if he was truly enjoying it. At first, I thought it was just someone's nasty joke, but I could tell it wasn't when he swung his sickle at me. He was literally trying to kill me. I almost lost my neck. When I got out of there, I immediately called the police. Shortly after, when the police arrived at the scene, they found no scarecrows at all. However, they did find evidence of murder, such as unknown bloodstains and flesh in the field. They're continuing to search the field. What was the scarecrow that was running after me and the rest of the scarecrows doing there? I still have terrible thoughts about it to this day. Were the rest of the scarecrows the bodies of the people he killed? If I didn't get out of there, would I have become one of those scarecrows? Or were the scarecrows other murderers in disguise?
Do you believe that a wish comes true if you want something badly enough? At first, I didn't believe in that at all. Just wish? That's BS. My wishes never came true, no matter how much I wanted them to. But now, I do believe it. And you would believe me if you listened to the story I'm about to tell you. There was a man I loved the most in the world. I had wanted him for such a long time. I always watched him from a distance, and not once did he so much as gaze in my direction. Actually, he had a girlfriend, and he didn't like me. However, I wanted to become one with him forever. So I prayed every day desperately to make him mine. Hiding next to his house, I watched him every night. I felt like I was with him when I saw him through the window. I tried to share a moment, like watching him eat, sleep, laugh, talk, or even just walk around. I was happy, but I couldn't make him mine, no matter how hard I tried. We just had nothing to do with each other. I prayed like crazy, day and night, for him to be mine, but it was futile. No matter how often I prayed, nothing changed. I ended up cursing the God for ignoring my invocations and lived in a state of constant frustration, thinking that my life would forever remain empty. Then one day, an idea suddenly came to me. This is it. I can finally make him mine. And soon, I decided to put my plan in motion. One late night, I snuck into his house and slammed his head with a big frying pan while he was asleep. He was rendered unconscious, and now I could lay down right next to him. I could smell his scent and hear his heartbeat and the sound of his breathing. I could feel his presence so vividly, laying there. That was the moment my dream came true. I knew I had done something wrong, yet I couldn't regret it, because this was the only thing I'd ever dreamt of in my life. And the man whom I wanted so badly was here, right next to me. I thought he may have suffered serious brain damage from the impact. Maybe he would be disabled. It didn't matter, as long as he remained by my side. My dream came true. Do you understand what I said before? Now I understand what so many people used to say. If you want something desperately enough, you can get it. Nothing is impossible. Now I can die without any regret. He is finally with me. However, my satisfaction was short-lived when I realized the cost of this moment would be my life as I knew it. Sooner or later, the police would surely catch me. I don't want to leave his side ever again. I lie next to him, wrap a string around his neck and mine, and pull it. I'll just sleep with him forever.
Six months ago, I moved to my new home in a new city, and I'll keep it private for my privacy, and you'll see why later in the story. I met my new neighbor. The first impression of him was that he was very nice, funny, and a down-to-earth guy, but his behavior began to change after getting to know him. He's becoming a bit weird. Then I met his son. He was telling me that his father was threatening him with stupid things because he was playing in the neighborhood and he only liked for his son to play at his house. He seemed like a hovering parent that did not like his son to go anywhere or to have any type of freedom. My neighbor began to be mean to everyone that lived near us. It became very distant, as if he wanted us to probably get away from him. At least that's what I was assuming. One night, it was around 2 a.m. when I was awakened by screaming and arguing. I stayed in my bed and I covered my ears with my pillow, but my window was open because I liked the fresh air. The arguing continued, then all of a sudden it stopped. I heard grunting and something being dragged across some type of floor. I got tired of hearing the noise, so I decided to get up and close my window, which is actually facing my neighbor's house. I got up, and as I were getting ready to close my window, I looked up at my neighbor's house, and I saw something hanging through a window, so I took this video. I didn't know what this was, but the prior argument that I heard told me that was a body hanger from the ceiling. I shut my window very quietly and I called the cops, but I whispered while I was on the phone with them. I don't know why, and at that point I didn't want to know why that happened. The person that he was arguing with was one of his son's friend's father. They were arguing over something my neighbor said to his son's friend. The police eventually came and they arrested him. I told them not to come over here so I didn't have to make a report, so I went down to the station. My neighbor has already been through trial, and he actually received a death sentence, but I don't want to give too much information because it'll bring up who I am.
This is the story of my friend Paul. He's an ordinary man in his mid-20s, but he's never been normal. He's been rejected by women all his life and never had a date with a girl before. Although he never gave up, he was never popular with the ladies. I felt kinda sorry for him. He would complain every day. Women are weird. They don't even know what's important. They need to find a man like me, but whatever. They don't realize that. He then started meeting women using some kind of app. Of course, he couldn't continue a relationship, but he would have a date at least once or twice a week. He finally ended up getting a girlfriend. At first, I thought he was joking. One day I came to his house to visit him. But when I reached the front door of his house, I heard someone screaming. It was Paul.
Fuck! Why don't you love me? Love me! You're my girlfriend! You have to love me! I'll kill you!
I could hear him cursing frantically, and there was the sound of something bumping and falling. I froze for a moment. Should I just go back home? After thinking for a moment, I called Paul. He spoke calmly and said that it was all right to come in. When I entered the house, I could see Paul was alone. His house was a mess with all the furniture broken down, and blood was dripping from his hands. His girlfriend was nowhere to be seen. I asked him where she was, and he replied, "She's gone now." I tried to say what I heard outside, but then just shut my mouth. He explained that he was just upset and broke the furniture himself. I wanted to inquire more, but I was afraid that things would get worse, so I just shrugged it off. Since that day, I hadn't been able to reach Paul. I had no way of knowing what he was doing. He never seemed to come outside recently. A few days later, I heard a sudden but familiar yelling voice while walking on the street in my neighborhood. I looked where the sound came from, and there was Paul.
Why don't any of you love me? Why? I'll kill you all!
He cried and ran into women on the street. People around him were trying to stop him. I could see women running away in the chaos. And Paul, he just looked like hell. As time passed, I heard his girlfriend went missing. However, he claimed that he didn't do anything to her. He insisted that he's innocent. On top of that, no evidence was ever found. However, I still know the truth in my heart. I know he could be the one who made her go missing. I just don't know what to do. Above all things, there was no conclusive evidence that he murdered her. And, of course, it may be that he's not the real criminal. The case remains unsolved, and the cops still haven't spotted him as the culprit. Yeah, the owner just up and vanished. Couldn't tell you why. Here. The man took the keys and welcomed his new home. After the old owner disappeared, leaving his home and belongings behind in ruins, the colonial property became a bargain sale on the market. The man entered the renovated two-story home and began unpacking his things. Everything was fine until that day. A month later, he hears something.
Les! Hello? Who's there?
The man stops on his stairs and looks around.
Avas!
He looks down at the steps, getting prone to listen closer.
Save us!
His heart stops and he jolts up. What he heard was a child's voice from below the steps.
I'll get you out of there. Just wait 1 second.
He runs upstairs to his room to find his tools.
Please.
He hears more from below his feet.
What the? But how's that?
Sure enough, he hears a child begging from beneath his bedroom floor, despite the lack of any space beneath it. He finds a big hammer.
Stand back!
He shouts, driving the hammer into the floorboards. Prying the hammer from the hole, he dropped to the floor and started to look through it. However, he couldn't see anything, only darkness, so he shined a flashlight into the hole. Just then, he saw an eye peeking through the hole. It soon disappeared and a mouth moved to replace it. Shrieking, he fell back.
Ah!
"Get us out of here, sir! It's so dark! Find the exit!" In search of a trap door, his hammer leaves 20 more holes behind.
Help us! Help us escape, please!
The hammer hit something solid, so he pried apart the floorboards. It was a metal door. He opened it and shined the flashlight down, but the light barely penetrated the darkness, so he got to his knees and reached down into the hole.
Grab on! I'll pull you kids out of there!
He feels a hand, then 2, then 10. Before he can speak, he's yanked hard onto the floor, his face pressed against it. When he struggled to pull his arm out, his right eye over a hole saw another mouth appear under the hole, with pink lips smiling. It was giggling, then licked his eye. His arm started throbbing in pain. When he managed to rip his arm away from the hole and got up, he could see the bite marks on his skin.
What's wrong with you? What are you trying to do?
Cacophonous giggles erupted from the holes. He had enough. He started off, leaving to find someone else to help. Then, an arm suddenly broke through the floor and grabbed his ankle. Screaming, he shook it loose and started running, but dozens more arms tried to grab after him as he barreled downstairs. He slipped through them and finally reached the door. All of a sudden, the ceiling started splitting, and the giggling returned as eyes and mouths appeared in the cracks. He fleed out the door and never came back. A month later, a woman came to the house. "So yeah, another disappeared, just like the prior owner. Here you go, ma'am." She took the keys and welcomed her new home.
I've never had the best of luck with guys. I appear to have poor taste when it comes to dating. After separating for good from my kid's father after 5 years, I was ready to just be myself. About 3 months of being a single mother, my neighbor approached me stating that a friend of his, Steve, would like to meet me. It didn't take long before he charmed his way into my life. The first 6 months were amazing, but he began to drink more and more, and each time he would get extremely agitated. He would start fights with random people, and even some of our friends. Slowly, our friends would stop coming around, knowing how Steve got when he drank. This, however, did not stop him from drinking. But now all the anger was aimed at me. It took roughly 6 to 8 months of buildup, from name-calling and shoving to punching and choking. Suddenly, this became a very abusive relationship. One time, I escaped out of the bathroom window. He later found me by beating up a friend of mine until he told him where I was. Steve began stripping all of my clothes off in a drunken rage, while laughing at me and challenging me to go ahead and try to escape while I was naked. The last night of abuse was by far the worst. Before Steve started drinking that night, I told him that my son, 3 years old, was not feeling very well, and I was going to stay with him as he fell asleep. My plan was to spend the night with my son. At around 2:30 in the morning, I heard the bedroom door open. I lied there pretending to be asleep. Several seconds went by. I held my breath as tears began to form in my eyes, when I suddenly felt his hand on top of my head. He grabbed my hair and yanked me out of bed, whispering in my ear, "I know you're avoiding me." Once in the living room, he threw me on the floor, then accused me of trying to leave him and demanded to know why. Before I could answer, he angrily came to the conclusion that it was another man. "I swear to God, if I catch you with another man, I'll kill you and him. He was obviously more drunk than normal. He punched and kicked me a couple of times, and I fell to the floor. I started to crawl to my son's room, and he slowly came from behind me, asking, "Where do you think you're going?" He then walked in front of me, kneeled down, and said, "You stay right there or I'm gonna hurt you real bad." He then sat on the couch and watched me as I sobbed on the floor. After about 30 minutes, it appeared that he passed out on the couch. I decided that this was my chance to escape. I put on an oversized shirt, picked up my son, and slowly crept by him. He suddenly woke up and grabbed my leg and said, "Where are you going?" I stammered out that I was going into the kitchen with my son to get him a drink. He then angrily replied, "Hurry up." As soon as I entered the kitchen, I ran out of the front door with no pants on, no shoes, and no purse. I carried my son all the way to the police station, which was thankfully only a few blocks away. After hours, the way the police station is set up is that you go into a room and press a button and talk to someone on the intercom. I ran in and put my back to the wall and pushed the button behind me as I slowly slid down into a sitting position while holding on to my son, waiting for Steve to burst through the door at any second. I remembered thinking if I was going to be beaten, at least it would be on camera. On the speaker I heard, "How can I help you?" All I could do was cry. I couldn't even get a word out of my mouth. I didn't know how to explain. 2 officers came out to assist me. A female officer took my son and got him some food, and I went with the male officer to make a report, and he gave me a blanket. After 15 minutes, I heard Steve screaming my name as they brought him down the hallway. I held my breath as if he knew I was behind the door. 30 minutes later, an officer came back with a sergeant. At first, I thought they were going to tell me to go back home and gather my belongings while Steve was being held in custody. Instead, they asked me more questions about his anger issues and if there had been any previous fights. I explained to them Steve's alcohol problem and how he had become increasingly more abusive. They then showed me a list in Steve's handwriting detailing how he would dismember my body in a good spot where I would be buried without being found. He also had possible dates written down with past dates crossed out. I couldn't breathe when I read this, and by this point tears were streaming down my face. I looked at the cop and asked, "What does this mean?" He looked back at me and said, "It means you're lucky." Steve was charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault. I left back home to Arizona before the trial started, but gave a detailed statement before I left. Steve, of course, pled not guilty, but in the end, he received 2 years in prison. Just before I left for Arizona, I received a letter from Steve. It simply read, "It's not over. You'll always be mine."
Mommy, is dinner ready? I'm hungry.
It will be ready in a minute, sweetie. I'm making your favorite dish, meat pies.
Yay, meat pies.
Why don't you set the table while I get the pies out of the oven?
Okay.
How does that taste, sweetie?
It's good, but the stuffing still tastes funny.
I told you, it's a new recipe that I'm trying. Now finish your dish, and let's get you to bed.
Okay, Mommy. Mommy, when will Daddy come home?
Don't worry, honey. Daddy will come home in a few days.
But you said that last week.
Don't worry, sweetie. Now, sleep.
Okay. Good night, Mommy.
Good night, sweetie. Love you. February 11th, 2025. The meat portions are getting smaller and smaller each day, and Daisy has been bombarding me with questions about her daddy. I can't hide the truth anymore. I can't forget what happened. It has been 4 weeks since the incident. Well, everything is still in lockdown mode. I haven't seen anyone on the streets either. The first 2 weeks were hellish for us. We ran out of food. We had enough to feed Daisy, but not enough for us. I couldn't handle the hunger anymore. It grew day by day, and then on the third week, I couldn't think straight, and I had done it. I never knew human meat would taste like fully matured veal. I even made Daisy's favorite dish, meat pies. I can't think of anything else but the texture and taste of it, and the hunger is still growing. I wonder what Daisy would taste like.
About 4 a.m., I was sitting in my living room watching YouTube on my TV. I was currently watching a horror story YouTube channel we all know very well. All of a sudden, my TV cut off for no reason. When I looked around, I realized that the whole electricity went out in general. Damn it, I said out loud, wondering what's going on. Let me pause the story by saying that I live in an extremely rural area. Our neighbors are so far away that you can go outside and do basically anything without getting caught. I needed to pee, so I thought I would step outside and check our electricity meter and use the bathroom in the backyard while I was there. However, I couldn't make it to the backyard before encountering a weird guy I'd never seen before.
Hey, is your power out too?
He said. I looked at him and replied with a yes as he grinned and said that his had been out for a while. To be honest, this was really weird as I know pretty much everyone around here and I never met him on any other occasion. I told him I was going to the store across the bridge from my house to get some snacks. He then said,
Hey, save your money. I've got plenty of snacks.
Since I didn't have a job at the time, I was extremely tight on money. I asked him what all he had and he said he had some meat-based snacks. I usually don't take stuff from strangers, but I doubt I would have even had enough money to get a 50-cent can of sausages at that time. I certainly didn't have a full $1 at that point. Thinking that it's probably some kind of beef jerky, I accepted and asked him where he lived. He said that he lived on top of the hill across the road from my house.
Follow me. We can hang out for a while.
I don't know why I did this, but this may very well be the most stupid decision I've ever made. I thought it was a little strange as I knew there were no houses on that hill, but I didn't really care. I thought maybe he was just horrible at directions. When we got to the top of the hill, I saw a small shelter made of nothing but sticks, and the whole area smelled like rotten meat. I instantly felt sick to my stomach. The guy pulled out a plastic freezer bag from his old dirty backpack and said it was already steamed so I could eat it straight from the pack. I thought I would know what kind of meat it was if I smelled it. I opened up the pack and was hit by that scent of rotten meat again. It was at least 20 times stronger than before. I threw up right there on the ground and dropped the backpack. Ugh! What the hell is that? I asked him, trying not to vomit again.
It's a special type of meat some people would kill for.
It was his response, and the red flags were raised in my mind just then. No, 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 I said with tears in my eyes.
Oh, but yes,
he said. He began laughing maniacally. I immediately grabbed the package and ran into a dark place in the woods on the hillside, knowing he wouldn't be able to find me. I then called 911 and gave them my location. They said they would be there soon. Within minutes, a few cops arrived near my house. I sprinted towards them and showed them the package, explaining what just happened. One of the cops vomited as he looked at the package. At first, I didn't understand why, until I looked at it in the light, where I could finally see what was causing that horrible smell. It was the skinless meat of someone's face. They took the package for examination and said they would let me know what they found out. It's been 3 weeks now, and they haven't gotten in touch with me. I hope they find out whose face that was and catch that sick cannibalistic bastard. But most of all, I hope I never see that man ever again. I lived in the countryside until I was 16. My neighborhood was a small town. I lived with my uncle and grandmother. This is a horror story I experienced at that time. Almost 10 years later, the memory hasn't faded. When I was about 15 years old, my grandmother held my hand one day and said, "If some girl begs you to help her at night, do not help her. You have to ignore it and run away." It was a very famous rumor in this town. I thought it was just a story made up by somebody like any other ghost story, so I didn't really care about it back then. Actually, everyone in the neighborhood knew this story. If you hear a girl's voice at night, you must run, or you'll die. It was an obvious story. Then one night, I was out playing outside with my friends, and it suddenly got dark. Man, Grandma's gonna be pissed. I started walking home in a hurry, but the way home wasn't close. It soon became dark outside, and I was walking alone on an empty road. I began to get a little scared, so I purposely hurried up, humming to myself to calm down. Then, I heard a girl's voice in the forest next to the road.
Help me.
I felt a chill run down my spine. As soon as I thought I heard it wrong, I heard the voice once again.
It hurts.
Although it was a really small voice, I could tell for sure it was the voice of a girl. I looked where the voice came from, but all I could see was the dark forest. But then I saw something behind a tree. Its appearance in the dark began to become clearer. There was a little girl lying behind the tree. I was extremely taken aback. Thinking that she might have been hurt, I tried to approach her. However, I immediately recalled what my grandmother had told me. With a feeling of wariness, I stayed on the spot and stared at her. Then, the girl moved slightly and said once again,
Is anybody there?
I couldn't see her clearly in the dark, but something was unnatural. It didn't feel right. I moved slowly to escape from the spot. I heard her voice again and again, but I didn't get any closer. As I kept walking to the side, I could see the back of the tree. She wasn't lying down. Someone was hiding behind the tree, holding her up and supporting her body. Her body was lulled. I couldn't tell whether she was dead or alive. Then, my heart dropped. I made eye contact with the man who was hiding behind the tree. He suddenly jumped out of the forest and started running towards me like crazy.
Help this poor girl!
It was the same girl's voice that I had just heard before. Screaming, I started to run away.
Ah!
This time, I heard the man in a deep voice. Crap, he didn't fall for it. I felt the fear of death and my whole life flashed before my eyes. Just then, I saw a flashlight in front of me and realized what it was shortly afterward. My uncle came looking for me on his bike. My God, I'm alive. Thinking this, I burst out crying. I ran to my uncle, and when I looked back, the man was gone. I told my uncle and grandmother everything I saw, and we soon called the police. Police began searching for him, believing that he was involved in several disappearances in the town, but they failed to find him. I still can't forget the voice I heard that night. I probably wouldn't be here right now if I wasn't so lucky. Always be careful of the stranger's voice.
This incident took place when I was 20 years old. Next door to my house lived a man who only had one arm. My dad said he was a very good doctor, but that he'd lost one of his arms in an accident. Whenever I ran into him, he smiled abnormally brightly and shook his remaining arm. I felt sorry for him, but on the other hand, his unnatural expression and gestures sometimes gave me the goosebumps. He lived alone and always smelled bad. At first I thought it could have been because it was hard to take a bath with one arm, but the stench just got worse and worse as the days went by. One night, I heard loud noises coming from his house. It sounded as though he was fighting with someone. I could hear screaming, things breaking, and other unnerving sounds. A little while after all that racket stopped, he came over to my house to apologize for all the noise and handed me a steak. I have to admit, the steak looked delicious, but I had to hold onto my nose because of his own stench. He then looked me over with a strange glance and smiled. I didn't know the meaning of that expression until a bit later. After all, aside from the noise, it was just a normal day, right? When I came to and opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor in a room that looked like a basement. My head hurt severely. When I touched it, my hair felt wet. I looked at my hand and there was blood all over it. Had I been hit over the head by someone? I tried to remember. After thinking about it for a long time, it started to come back to me. The doctor had come over to my house and handed me a steak. Then he had looked past me into the house and said,
"So, is there no one at home?"
I was home alone that night because my parents were getting home late, so I replied, yes. As soon as I tried to close the door, he had pulled something out from behind his back and hit me on the head. Hard. I must have fainted, and now I had been kidnapped by him and locked up in the basement of his house. Then I noticed the smell. It was the same terrible stench that always followed the doctor. It hung in the air so fully that I just knew the source had to be close by. I looked around slowly. There were many things, and machines that seemed to be used for some kinds of experiments. I turned my eyes towards where the smell was the strongest. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A dead body lying on the floor. No, 2 dead bodies, each one missing an arm. I covered my mouth to hold back a scream. My hands were shaking. Just then, I heard a squeaking sound, followed by footsteps. The doctor was coming down the stairs into the basement. Quickly, I laid back down and stayed as still as I could, pretending to still be unconscious. Opening my eyes just barely, I could see the doctor heading towards the desk, humming to himself. On it, there lay 2 severed arms. He put one of them up to his stump and stepped in front of a mirror to look at himself, as if he was trying on clothes at the store. I couldn't breathe at all. After trying on both of the arms, he put them away, turned around and started approaching me. He held my arm up to his stump, then he pulled out a pen and started drawing a line around my arm. I had to do something to survive. When he turned his back to find some tools, I kicked him as hard as I could. He fell to the floor and I managed to escape. When I was finally safely home, I immediately called the police. They arrived fast and arrested him. It turns out he wasn't a doctor at all, but a crazy man who believed himself to be one, and also thought that he could attach another person's arm onto his own stump to replace the one he was missing. The trauma of this incident has left me with the tendency of folding my hands behind my back. I don't shake hands with anyone out of fear that my arm might be taken by someone else.
To the woman at the bar last night who noticed my body language, thank you. You couldn't have known the specifics. Maybe the guy that was being aggressive with me was my boyfriend, and we were just having a fight. Maybe you were afraid to get involved in a stranger's business, but you saw my nervous, intimidated body language, and you acted. There were couples and groups everywhere, but it took you, another girl alone at the bar, to recognize my struggle and act. We made eye contact. I was twisting my body away from the man's touchy hands and pleaded with my eyes. The look you gave me back was more than clear. You understood exactly what was happening to me. You'd probably been through it yourself. I can see you coming over and calling me by a generic term instead of a random name. Hey girl! It's been such a long time, you said, extending your arms and a lifeline. You wrapped your arms around me. It was a different sort of stranger's touch from the man's hand on my knee. I squealed like we were long-lost best friends, and I asked you what you were doing here. I remember the dull ache in my stomach when I heard you say that you were celebrating getting your master's in marine biology. Once upon a time, long before Rob and I ran these schemes in dirty bars, I had been a little girl that wanted to be a marine biologist. Oh well, that was literally a lifetime ago. Oh my god! Congrats, girl! I yelled at you violently and asked if you wanted to dance. Of course! You replied, returning my vigor like I had loaned it to you. While we were heading out to the dance floor, I thought long and hard about giving Rob a signal. Your interest in marine biology made me feel guilty for a moment, but I ultimately took it as a sign that you were just my type, that you would taste wonderful. Only God knows how hungry I was. So we started dancing, leaving behind Rob at the table. He hunkered off, pretending to be dejected. Nobody noticed him pass by where you had been sitting before, and nobody noticed him pour a small vial of liquid into your drink. Well, to the woman at the bar last night who noticed my body language, thank you for being so gullible.
Let me give you some background before I begin my story. This took place in the summer of 2014. I'm a female who was 22, turning 23 that fall. I don't want to share my location, so I'll be making some minor changes for privacy reasons. I live in a small college town. I've lived there my whole life, and I've graduated from there. There's a lot of history in this little town, but unfortunately we do have a drug problem here. Other than that, we don't get a whole lot of crazy around our small town. I worked at a gas station that was owned by a family member. My husband and I worked opposite shifts. I was the early bird, so I would work the morning shift. I would get up around 3:30, 4 o'clock, and open the store by 5. I was never worried about walking out to my car in the dark because I grew up living in the countryside outside of town. I loved being outside, even when it was dark. I used to lie in the grass and look up at the stars. When my friends would come over, we would always play Ghost in the Graveyard at night and did your typical teenager stuff during dark hours. Just messing around and having a little fun. We owned about 4 acres of land, and no one ever bothered us, so I was used to being outside in the dark with no fear at all, which I'm not too fond of because I was so used to being in an open space, and I was never really a city girl, even to this day. Now that you've got some background, let's get into the story. Now this is going to be a 2-part story, so bear with me, because both of these incidents occurred very close to each other. As I mentioned before, it was the summer of 2014. I was getting ready for work like I usually did. When I got into my car, I started pulling out of my apartment's driveway. I then noticed a man walking down the road, pulling a suitcase behind him. As I got closer, I began to wonder why someone would be walking down the street pulling a suitcase at 4:40 in the morning. I thought about pulling up next to him and rolling down my window to ask him if he needed me to call the police or something, but I was suspicious. I grew up being told not to talk to strangers or to pick up hitchhikers, so there was no way that I was going to let a stranger into my car. But I'm also a nice person, and I'm always willing to help in any way that I can. But I wouldn't do something that could put my life in danger. When I pulled out of the driveway, the man then started walking right towards my vehicle. I remembered losing my nerve and took off down the street. I looked into my rearview mirror to see him just standing there watching me. I knew something was off about this person, and I was also thankful that I didn't offer to help him. Some of you might think, oh, you're just over-exaggerating. But come on, why would this man come right at my vehicle? And what the hell was he doing walking with a suitcase in the middle of the street at 4 o'clock in the morning? Once I reached my work, I called the police and reported it. I told them that I was just a concerned citizen, and I have been living in this neighborhood for the past 4 years, and I had never seen this man before. The police told me that they would send a car out to patrol the area. Hours went by, and I didn't hear anything from them, so I decided to call them back and inquire if they found anything. They told me that there was no trace of the man, so I just brushed it off and went about my day. I later mentioned it to my husband after my shift, and he told me that it was probably someone returning home from the airport or something, but the nearest airport is about an hour's drive away. My husband thought I was just overreacting about the whole thing. A few weeks later, I was talking to one of my customers and brought up this incident. It's a small town and everyone talks to everyone around here. As soon as I mentioned the man with the suitcase, my customer looked like he crapped his pants. He then started telling me that the police had recently discovered bodies in suitcases in our county. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and my heart began to pound out of my chest. My customer asked me if I remembered what he looked like, but I didn't really get a good look at him. I'm not 100% sure if the man that I saw was the suitcase killer, but regardless, I'm glad I didn't stop to help that man. A couple of months later, I was again getting ready for work. I headed out of the back door of my apartment. My husband and I lived at the end of the hallway, so I figured I would just park my car close to the back door because I thought it would be easier than going all the way down the hallway. Plus, a lot of the front parking spots are always taken. When you go out of the back door, there are these huge pine trees lining a cement pathway that guides you to the back parking lot. It was still dark out, and the moment that I opened the back door, straight ahead was the dark figure of a large man running straight towards me. I didn't hesitate and I slammed the door shut and rushed back into my apartment. My heart was pounding violently inside my chest. I was in full-on flight mode. I had never run so fast in my life. The moment that I reached the bedroom, my husband literally sat straight up and asked me if I was alright. After I explained to him what was going on, he stood up from the bed and headed to our door to look through the peephole to see if there was anyone in the hallway. He saw nothing, so he opened the door a crack and started looking around. But there was no one there. I was still shaking, even when my husband walked me out to my car. I'm lucky to have such a great guy for a husband. Later that day, when my husband arrived at the gas station for his shift, he told me from now on to park in the front where the lights were. The same week, I ended up buying some pepper spray just in case I needed it in the future. It's been about 7 years, and I still haven't used it, thank God. But I want to warn you all, even though you feel like you're safe in your own neighborhood, you still have to take precautions. Make sure that you park in well-lit areas if you're going to work very early like me. Always have a can of pepper spray or some sort of protection. You need to be aware of your surroundings, because you never know if there's someone hiding in the shadows, waiting for you to let your guard down. There are a lot of freaks roaming the streets, and you have to be careful out there, and if something doesn't feel right, follow your gut.
One rainy night 3 years ago, I was driving on a quiet road with no other cars. Despite of the heavy rain, I managed to spot a soaked-up man standing at the side of the road. His presence was strange. There was no place for pedestrians anywhere nearby. I thought that something may have happened to him, so I stopped the car. My headlights lit him up slightly. He seemed to be grinning widely. I was surprised, as my initial assumption had been that something was wrong. But if that was the case, why would he be laughing like that? I lowered my window, only a little, feeling unsure. The man approached. When he got closer, and I got a better look at his face, my heart dropped. He wasn't smiling. He had no upper lip at all, as if it had been cut off. I could see his eyes were red. I wasn't sure if all the water running down his face was rain, or if there were tears mixed in. I spoke in a trembling voice. "Sir, do you need any help?" Then he suddenly screamed and rushed at me. "You should be like me!" He took out his knife and stuck it through the small opening in the window, madly trying to force it down further. I hurriedly closed the window and started the car, then hit the gas. I could see him chasing me like crazy from the rearview mirror. I floored it with all my might and got the heck out of there. I don't even remember exactly how I got home, and my trembling heart wouldn't calm down until morning. Even after all these years, I tremble whenever I think about that night. I don't have any idea what that man's story could have been, what kind of a person he was, or if he was even human. But one thing is for sure, I will never drive on that road again.
In my senior year of college, me and my boyfriend at the time lived in an off-campus apartment on the 3rd floor of this big old townhouse. In the mudroom/closet area right by the door was where we kept our cat's litter box. Now, most people can tell you that unless it's right after your cat uses the box, it doesn't smell like poop. Usually just the cat litter smell. Clay, Febreze, whatever it is. So for about a week, I noticed it smelled like death in that little corner. And I tore the area apart and the rest of the apartment looking for rogue turds, but found absolutely nothing. Then right in the middle of the mystery stink ordeal, I had to leave for a week to go on a work trip. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a welcome break from what was massively a disgusting little problem. And I quite openly hoped that my boyfriend might get the whole thing fixed before my return. But to my horror, it only got worse, with my boyfriend texting me one night with the bad news that the smell seemed to have spread into the hallway outside. I felt bad for him, but there was nothing much I could do other than advise him to just call the landlord and see what she could make out of it. He says okay, and he'll call her in the morning and keeps me updated on everything that happens. The next morning, I'm getting texts off of him like every 20 minutes, stuff like, "Just called landlady and she's on her way." Then I get stuff like, "She thinks it's coming from another apartment." Then, okay, it's definitely coming from another apartment, which I was kind of relieved about, but oh my god, was that jumping the gun, because things were about to get way worse. The last text I get is, "She just called the cops." I reply with, "Please don't tell me someone died next door to us." Then my boyfriend starts typing, but then stops. I go into full panic mode, trying to work out what it might be, because I can't face the thought that our neighbor actually died, and we were living next to a corpse for like weeks, and partially because we were the jerks and didn't check on her. Then after about an hour, my worst fears are confirmed. The landlady gave some cop permission to bust the door down, and when he did, my boyfriend said he and the landlady literally ran from the sight that greeted them. Our neighbor's dead body was lying there, face down in the hallway, with one arm out like they were reaching for the door when they fell. That piece of hallway ran perfectly adjacent to our mudroom, where we keep the cat's litter tray, which is why it smelled the worst there and out in the hallway. The whole time I've been thinking to myself, frickin' cat, shaking my head and scrubbing the floor, and there had been a dead body just on the other side of the wall, not even 2 or 3 feet away. We always keep up with our neighbors now, even if they're more than capable of looking after themselves. Having that network, that kind of community, you don't realize how important it is until it's far too late.
It all started when I was 8 years old and we had just moved to Michigan. One night, my older brother and I were playing video games on our old PlayStation 1. In the middle of our session, I got a little bit thirsty and headed to the kitchen to get something to drink. When I was walking to the fridge, I noticed this odd, small shape in the woods outside, but I figured it was just a tree stump and thought nothing further of it. So I grabbed my drink and went back to play with my brother until bedtime. In the middle of the night, though, I woke up to the sound of crunching leaves. The little 8-year-old me was immediately scared. I remember my heart was pounding so fast. I got out of bed, pulled aside the curtain, and stared into the woods. But all I could see was the same shape that I'd seen earlier that night. Eventually, I managed to calm myself down and went back to bed. The next morning when I woke up, I thought that I'd probably just had a bad dream. I'd soon learn just how wrong I was. I went downstairs for breakfast and poured myself a big bowl of cereal, but just when I was about to take the first bite, I suddenly felt sick. I could feel the hot puddle of drool in my mouth and my stomach twisted like it'd been tied into a knot. I rushed to the bathroom. When I threw up, all I could see were slimy and green things. I hadn't eaten anything bad. In fact, I had barely eaten the day before. There was nothing I could think of that could be causing me to retch like this. My mother walked in to help me clean up and then took me to see a doctor. The doctor ran a couple of tests on me, but the results showed nothing out of the ordinary. He told us to just wait a couple of more days and see if it would pass. Luckily, it did. The following few months were calm and free of any strange incidents. Then my cousin came over. We were playing on the trampoline in the backyard when I felt sick again. This time it was a bit different though. I didn't throw up. I just felt really sick and anxious. I went to my mother and told her that I wasn't feeling well, and she said that I probably just needed to eat something to feel better. Eventually my cousin went home and the day was perfectly normal again, until I went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of crunching leaves. I looked towards the window, and what I saw made my stomach drop. It was a woman's figure. I couldn't move at all, and my chest and right arm were hurting so badly. I somehow managed to finally find my voice and screamed as loud as I could. My parents burst into the room. My mother called 911 while my father stayed with me, trying to comfort me. At that point, I think I just fainted. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. I ended up staying for 2 more days until I had properly recovered. Then years passed, and that strange woman didn't appear again. Around the time I turned 16, my family had to move to New York due to my father's job. On the day we were supposed to leave Michigan, I was finishing packing up my room. All of a sudden, I felt that strange wave of nervousness course through my body again. I immediately spun toward the window and froze. There she was, the same woman I had seen years ago. She was standing there in a long torn-up dress in the very same spot and looking directly at me. Except, in the daylight, I could see her face better. She had no hair and was missing both eyes. Just like when I was 8, I couldn't breathe or move at all. I heard my mom calling my name, but I couldn't answer. Shortly after, she knocked on my door. As soon as she entered and saw me having a seizure on the floor, she screamed. Then, something really strange happened. When my father ran in, having heard my mother scream, she was looking out the window and said to him, "Don't call the cops. She just wants to play. Give her a chance." My mother stopped caring about me and kept repeating the same phrase over and over again. I thought she'd gone crazy. But by the time the police arrived at the house, she had stopped repeating the words and was like my usual mom again. I was rushed to the emergency room and got an MRI to see if I had brain damage or something. But they told me that my brain looked perfectly healthy. We moved, and I thought that that would be the end of all that. A few years later in New York, I had found a job at a local store. I was just about finished with my night shift and about to lock the front door when I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. I turned around and the woman with no eyes was standing right there. It had to be a nightmare. It just had to be. I passed out almost immediately. I didn't even have time to scream. When I woke up again, I could see flashing red and blue lights. The emergency technician said that my heart had stopped beating for about 60 seconds. The woman with no eyes hasn't appeared since then. Maybe she thinks that she finally managed to kill me. Yet, I'm still alive.